If you're ready to unlock more better days, to take control of your health, to push past your limits and unleash your full potential, then you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Bettle. For over 2 decades, I've worked with elite athletes and high performers, helping them optimize their bodies, strengthen their minds, and recover from setbacks. Now I'm bringing that expertise to you through the Vitality Collective podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the science, strategies, and real-world solutions you can apply right away. Whether it's enhancing your physical performance, avoiding or recovering from injury, sharpening your mental edge, or simply feeling your best every single day. With insights from top experts and thought leaders, this podcast is designed to help you take action, feel better, and live the life that you deserve. Welcome to the Vitality Collective podcast, where every day is vital. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Mike Joyner, a global authority in cardiovascular fitness and endurance performance. In this episode, we unpack the essentials of VO2max, delve into the practicalities of Zone 2 training, and highlight why these elements are cornerstones of long-term health and vitality. If you've ever wondered how to boost your fitness efficiently and sustainably, this conversation is a must listen. Let's dive in. Joining me on the show today is Professor Mike Joyner. We're going to talk about VO2max, Zone 2 training, and all things cardiovascular fitness. And I think you're going to walk away with some really powerful takeaways. Dr. Joyner, welcome.
Jeremy, it's great to be with you, and I look forward to visiting.
Yeah, really excited about this. It's a topic that I think is becoming more and more popular within the public domain. And we've seen VO2max identified as perhaps the most or one of the most important markers of longevity. But one of the things that became clear to me recently is that there isn't a great understanding of what it actually is.
Right.
And a story I've got about that, I was giving a talk on the importance of VO2max and so launched into this story, told the whole story up on stage. And when I came down, somebody pulled me aside and was like, wow, like this is important. Like, what is it? Right?
Yeah, there you go.
Realized I hadn't actually got to that part, right? So can you help us out with that? What is a general definition of VO2max?
Yeah, Jeremy, before I go on, let's just, one little ground rule that my institution always likes when I do these things is just to mention that I'm speaking on my own behalf, these are my opinions of my own, and those are my institution. But now, what is VO2 max? So VO2 is volume of oxygen, max is maximum. So it's maximal oxygen uptake. What is the maximum volume of oxygen somebody can use per minute? And normally, a sedentary, normal-sized male uses about 250 mLs of oxygen per minute at rest when they're doing nothing. So a quarter of a liter, roughly, or about 8 ounces, right? Now, as people start to exercise, obviously you use more oxygen because your muscles are contracting, and that's driving a whole bunch of this oxygen consumption. And during heavy exercise, people sometimes are using 10 times as much oxygen as they are at rest, and the elite athlete 20 or even 25 times as much. And so if you take somebody, put them on a treadmill or a bike, and you start at a brisk walk or a jog, and then slowly increase the speed or the grade, their oxygen consumption goes up. And it goes up in a pretty linear fashion, provided the jumps and workload are pretty linear. And then you get to a point of really heavy exercise where you increase the workload, the oxygen consumption doesn't go up anymore. And this typically, not always, correlates with what we call a rating of perceived exertion of 19 or 20, something very close to your maximum heart rate. And if we put you in a lab on a machine where you wear a mouthpiece or a mask, and we measure how much air is going in, and we measure how much air is going out, and we know the difference in the oxygen levels of the air going in and what's in the air going out, we can do some equations and calculate your oxygen consumption. Mm-hmm. So it's the peak oxygen you can use during heavy exercise. For most people, they get that walking or running up a grade. If you're a trained skier or cyclist or rower, you would probably do a little bit better while rowing.
Right. Yeah, so the adaptations are pretty specific then to the modality that you choose to exercise.
And the thing to remember is most healthy young people can get to a value of 10, 12, 13, 14 fold above rest.
Hmm.
and that the athlete can do quite a bit more.
Right.
The elite endurance athlete, we might add.
Hmm.
But the strength training people, not so much, unless they do some endurance training.
And so from that, help the listeners make that link then between if this is the maximum oxygen you can consume while exercising,
Right,
how is that helping with longevity?
right. So if you look at large populations and you take a measurement of physical capacity, it could be as simple as a hand grip. It could be there was something in the Journal of the American Medical Association 2, 3 years ago, which I'm sure you remember, looking at longevity and like firefighters based on how many push-ups they can do.
Right.
There's the group in Brazil looking at how easily people can get off the floor. There
Hmm.
are things in much older people that are in their 70s, 80s, that are called sit to rise. There's
Hmm.
self-selected walking speed. All of these things are correlated. So while having a very high maximal oxygen consumption means that your heart can pump a lot of blood and also get a lot of blood and have a good blood supply to it, it also is a generic marker of just your overall physical capacity. And all of these things in populations correlate. So the people that are the fittest are going to be able to get off the floor. They're going to have a higher self-selected walking speed. They may have better grip strength. They may be able to do more push-ups, that sort of thing. So one of the things you have to recognize with all of this data showing that either VO2max or peak exercise capacity, how many watts you can achieve, or the speed and grade you can go on a treadmill, what you got to recognize is that all of those are kind of auto-correlated in large populations, and all are just general markers of how healthy you are and how well your body is working. So while we certainly want to get people's cardiorespiratory fitness up, and I'm all for everybody trying to increase their VO2 max, the thing to remember is it's the doing it that makes you stronger, makes things better, and helps all of these things that are markers of physical vigor. And more physical vigor equals more longevity.
Yeah, that's certainly, we were just chatting before this. We view longevity, really we called it vitality collective, because
Yep,
we view quality of life as your ability to function and do the activities that
correct,
you love. And I think all of these markers being high, these one-off measurements, you don't just show up tomorrow and you've got a high VO2 max,
correct,
right? It's sort of an indication of a life well lived, right? That
correct.
you've been active, you've been healthy.
You haven't gained a lot of weight, and the same is true
Yeah.
with the strength measurements and the coordination measurements. But the other thing that has been shown is that people who change their habits in middle age can dramatically lower their risk. So if people start to train, start to become more physically active, and improve the marker of your choice, that they probably start fitting into a lower risk category after they've been doing that for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Likewise, some of the classic studies on exercise capacity and exercise, recreational physical activity, and longevity are conducted in Harvard alumni by the late Dr. Ralph Paffenbarger, who was one of the first people to show just how protective vigorous physical activity was in terms of longevity. So Dr. Paffenbarger, or Paff as he was known, went and looked at a bunch of Harvard alumni and showed that the people who continued to engage in vigorous physical activity, jogging, playing squash or tennis, swimming, biking, that sort of thing, had much lower rates of cardiovascular disease. And it was about like running maybe 20 miles a week, 2,000 calories a week of
Hmm.
exercise. But one of the buried in all this Harvard alumni data is that the varsity athletes were only protected if they remained active. So the varsity
Right.
athletes who stopped exercising lost whatever protection that they had in middle age and as they got older. So you got to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Coming from the world of professional sport, I saw it over and over again. These athletes that have really, as long as they can remember, they've been involved in structured physical
Yeah,
activity, and it's then become their job. And so
right.
it's not for the joy of it anymore. It's because they have to show up and lift weights. They have to show up
Yeah,
and practice. And then there's almost a rebellion when they retire.
yeah, right,
And the guys that don't keep it up, man, you see them a couple of years later, and
right.
they do not look like they did when they were athletes.
Jeremy, that's quite. But then you have people. You're from the hockey background. You have people like Mark Messier, who looks like he could go out and play.
Right.
You look at him. Well, I don't know how old he is. He's in his 50s, but you look at him on TV and he's hard as a rock.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's quite interesting about that, there's some data from varsity athletes at USC. As you go through that cohort of people who grew up, just after World War II in the 40s, 50s, 60s, to the younger cohorts, you have a whole lot of people in the younger cohorts who started to specialize at a very young age,
Mm-hmm.
and do look at it as a job. And when they are done with whatever competitive endeavors they have, they're done. Just as you
Right.
described, or frequently, not always, they're more likely to not be doing anything in middle age. Whereas you look at the older people who played multiple sports, who have less supervised, more free play, we're what we call free range kids now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're out moving around and making up games with their compatriots. Those individuals are much more likely to be doing things when they get in their 60s and 70s because their initial goal was fun. Then when they're 15, 16, 17, somebody realized this kid's got some ability and let's see if he can become an elite. Versus, hey, Junior's 12 years old, and he's already pitching the ball or doing this or doing that. Let's have him play baseball. Because a lot of those people, played 3-4 sports. We didn't have as many women competing then, but, a lot of the women who were competing were doing softball, tennis, track and field, swimming. So they were doing multiple sports. And the guys in the United States were doing football, basketball, baseball, and track, typically. Mm-hmm. In the northern climes up here where I'm in Minnesota, some hockey. But they were doing multiple things, and so because they had this play mentality, a lot of those people are still hard at it, and because when you see those people, because again you've worked with these individuals, when you see those individuals who do this because they started with play and it continues to be play, they're hyper competitive, mm-hmm. and so they go to the gym, they do this, do that, and they want to be the fittest 55-year-old, or they want to be the fittest 60-year-old. Or they want to be able to get out and skate a little bit in the old timers game, or do this or do that, or and not embarrass themselves. So a lot of them are real tough customers. Down where you are, Rick Barry, the great basketball player, has become. I think he's in his 80s, I think, or very late 70s. I think he's a top pickleball player.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I think again his competitive zeal. It's obviously he's a very coordinated man. Played in the NBA, was a great player. Mm-hmm. But I think his competitive zeal is carried forward.
Yeah, what's been really interesting for me moving from the UK to the US is seeing the opportunity for people to continue playing their sport beyond high school. You've got this huge cohort of people playing sport in high school who don't get a college scholarship, and so there's really no structure for them to continue. Same, after college, a certain number will go professional, and then there's really nothing for them. In the UK, I grew up playing for Lutterworth Rugby Club. I started at 4 years old, and they have a veterans team that could go up. You could be 100 and still be playing. Right. So there was sort of a formal structure for people to find their level. A lot of people rose from those ranks to professional, but then as they retire out of professional, will come back to their club. And it keeps you in community. It keeps you involved in competitive sport. And that's the sort of model we're trying to perpetuate here is if you stay in the sport, they'll live longer.
Well, I think the other thing there, too, is that's super helpful is, people become aunts and uncles. So the older people, when they're 50, 60, 70, they tell the war stories. They're there for, to talk to a frustrated young kid. They're there a lot of times to talk to the coaches and be a sounding board and tell some story. Well, back in 1963, we'd lost 4 in a row and, whatever, they're there to be, Uncle Jack and Uncle Jill. One sport in the United States that's done very well, and this is Masters swimming. Mm-hmm. And one of the most interesting things about Masters swimming recently, and I'm blocking her name because she qualified for the Olympic trials and is still swimming very well in her middle 40s. There are a number of examples of women who were really good in like the early 2000s or late 90s who, stay in shape, get married, start having kids. They start taking their kid to swim practice and they figure, well, what the heck? I might as well jump in the master's program, right? Yeah. So just, stay in shape, right? And they get good again. And there's a woman, a breaststroker, who got in the finals of the Olympic trials and is still doing very well. And she's like 46 or something. again, I'm blocking her name, but she's not the first person like that. There have been other examples of particularly among the women. And again, masters running's been big, but again, this club system is not as big a deal because you're right. It's high school, college, whatever. There are rec leagues, and in many cities, I think there used to be. I think it's faded, but there used to in many large cities in the United States. There was a downtown YMCA that had these basketball games at noon, known as noon ball,
Right.
and that were where the and again all men, but the attorneys and the business people, the insurance executives, those guys would come play some pretty brutal 3-on-3 basketball, and some of these guys were quite skilled. Had played at a high level, or even had a taste in the NBA.
Yeah.
So they were really good, and you had guys, because it was half court. You had guys playing a long time.
Yeah, it's really interesting up in Toronto with the Leafs. We would have you'd have morning skate, and then you have the game. And at lunchtime, you'd have shinny, right? So you'd have everyone from Hall of Famers like Brendan Shanahan and those former players, as well as the guy that writes the checks in accounting and the Zamboni driver, all just jumping in and playing. It's a wonderful environment to watch right there at Scotiabank Center. So really cool to see people doing that.
It's fantastic to see that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I really agree with you that the rec league thing and these, but see, the clubs are anchors of community in places like in Europe. You have a lot of people who live, very close to where they were born. In the U.S., that's not the case. People are moving all the time. And you have a clubhouse, and you had this social structure for a long time, which is great.
Yeah, no, and that being such an important driver again of longevity, that's your community.
Yeah, right.
Being in that really engaged community.
Totally agree, and I think again that's the aunt and uncle effect. So I think that's tremendously valid. It's super helpful to the young people. Mm-hmm. And it's incredibly validating for the older people. As somebody, I'm going to be 67 here in about 6 weeks, or maybe a month actually. And sometimes around the hospital, I get, the people in the department in their 30s and 40s saying, "Is it really true that X used to happen?" And you say, "Yeah, it's really true that X used to happen."
Yeah.
And you're to tell them stories about how things used to be, and it wasn't always not. And sometimes it was a bad old days, sometimes it's good old days. But it's helpful to help them frame their current experiences, Jeremy.
Yeah, great context, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So as we swing back to VO2max specifically, then you mentioned treadmill tests and bike tests and things like that. How can somebody go and get a measurement and really understand their VO2max?
There are commercially available labs that do it. You can get it in my lab. You got to kind of be part of a study. Certain hospitals offer it, and again, there are these sort of freestanding places where you can do it. The other thing you can do is to get a pretty good estimate is to do what's called the Cooper test.
Right. So can you explain that to us?
Yeah, Kenneth Cooper is one of he wrote the book Aerobics, and so he's about 90 years old now. In his early 90s, is the medical director and founder of the Cooper Clinic. He may not be the medical director anymore, but he's the senior member of the delegation. An early guy in preventive medicine who wrote a book in about, I think, 1968 called Aerobics, where he extolled the virtues of getting so many points per week. And you got points for doing this and points for doing that to build up your cardiovascular system and also prevent lifestyle-associated diseases. So he was very early in this. And what he did when he was in the Air Force earlier is Cooper had measured VO2max in several hundred Air Force enlisted men and officers, and plotted their VO2max on the treadmill versus how long it took them to run, or how far they could run in 12 minutes. And there's a very tight correlation between how far you can run in 12 minutes and your VO2max. Now, there's some variability, and some people, because they're less efficient or their running stride isn't quite as good. But if you look at Cooper tests, you can go to Wikipedia and there's an equation to plug in how far you can run in 12 minutes. And so, you get all kinds of things on wearables, and it's going to predict this or this is going to predict that, or what's your heart rate during the submaximal thing on this bike or that bike or whatever. So there's all these other things, but really nothing is better than the Cooper test. Which is from the old school, but it really works. And what's really super interesting about that is later on, at least in elite athletes, elite distance runners, your velocity at VO2max, when they do a treadmill test that is not ramped, they just have people, they're running, some of these people are running 14, 15, 16 miles an hour. Your velocity, yeah, exactly. It's interesting to have somebody come off the back of the treadmill at those speeds, right?
Yeah.
And most treadmills only go 12 miles an hour. You got to have a really good treadmill that goes to 15 or so. But anyways, when you do that, Jeremy, velocity at VO2 max is highly correlated with the velocity for 3,000 meters or 2 miles. So that's all sort of convergent there. So if you want an estimate, and remember this too, is that again, if we go back to the longevity, we go back to all those other things in addition to VO2 max that are correlated with longevity. Again, it's not what your VO2 max is, it's what you can do.
Yeah.
So, if you gave me a choice between having a high VO2 max or a higher velocity at VO2 max, I'd take the velocity. It's about how much work you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. That agreed with that. It's really interesting, again, coming out of sport and into the general population domain, and seeing sort of how people train and what they focus on.
Right.
And weightlifting tends to be in segments where we've got the upper, the core, and the lower. Like these don't speak.
Yeah.
Right? We're all separate. And, I think there's a lot of confusion around, what should my VO2 max be? We've really started hanging out at numbers versus how do we function in space.
Right. No, I agree. And see, one of the problems is there's something called Goodhart's law. It's called when a metric becomes an outcome, it ceases to be a useful metric, which is a kind of a general principle in this society we live in, where everything's got a metric associated with it. And so one of the things I think people have to recognize is forget the metrics and think of the process to get to a better metric, right? Because you just can't get a metric, and I think that's one of the problems. With some of the quote bro science end quote around you're going to do this, you're going to do that, where all those things may make a difference, but what's really going to make a difference and explain 90% of the variability or how well you're doing is going to be the choices that you make and the lifestyle you live. And so while certain things can help, but those are punctuation marks. And not the narrative. The narrative is, are you strength training? Are you endurance training? What's your body composition? That kind of thing.
Yeah, because one of the things we've heard is that if you move from the bottom 25th percentile to the top 25th percentile in VO2 max, all of a sudden you get these dramatic changes in your longevity outlook.
Right.
Does it then matter? If somebody starts training, and their VO2 max doesn't make that big leap,
right?
Are you saying, is it more important that they're training or that they see the leap?
More important than their training, because remember, so you got VO2 max, which is primarily a marker of how much blood your heart can pump to the muscles, right? Mm. And so some people are going to get larger, what we call stroke volume. So each time their heart beats, they're going to do this. And so some people have a 4-cylinder engine, and with a lot of training, they can make it a 6-cylinder engine. Some people start with a 6-cylinder engine and they can make it an 8-cylinder engine. There are the odd people who start with a 6-cylinder engine and can make it a 12-cylinder engine. They're less still possible, but less common. People that have a lot, and the genes associated with this have not been identified. It's very complicated from a genetic basis. Mm-hmm. But there is a biological difference there. Biological explanation for it, at least at some level, of people who have quote more talent. And we all know people. Again, in the old days, we were talking about the Cooper test. In the old days, when there were physical fitness tests for kids, there was a 600-yard run in the United States. And many elite distance runners were recognized based on doing very well in this fitness test. The skinny kid who couldn't make the basketball team, but could do the 600-yard run way faster than anybody. Mm-hmm. And those kids, again, in the good old days, were sent to cross country and track, and a lot of them became very, very accomplished. But let's think about what endurance exercise training does for you. The first thing is it increases, and strength training does this too. You activate your skeletal muscles and you immediately start to do things associated with glucose metabolism that has a profound anti-diabetic effect, right? Just a single bout of exercise does that. So that's good. The next thing that happens is your blood vessels grow. So they get bigger. They get bigger and the caliber goes up. That takes a while. The lining of your blood vessels gets slippery so that you're less likely to form clots. And then what's called your autonomic nervous system, the nervous system that controls your heart rate, gives you what's called more vagal tone, which again has profound effects on your risk of sudden death or strange arrhythmias. So all these things happen just by exercise training, and they don't necessarily happen to a greater extent if your VO2max goes up.
Right,
So
I see.
all of these other things happen. Your cholesterol goes down, your blood pressure is better. All those things happen independent of your VO2max, and they probably explain why more exercise training and getting fitter reduces your risk so much.
Right.
So it's not the VO2max per se that reduces your risk. It's all the things that contribute in the periphery, the rest of the body beyond your heart, that really help you.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And then, so we've got VO2 max and becoming very popular now, and there's a lot of sort of myths around this, is zone 2 training.
So zone is my favorite.
What is zone 2 training?
Well, zone 2 is one of those things where nobody can define it, but everybody knows it when they see it, right? Because you get a lot of different definitions. So, so there, some people claim there are 3 zones, 4 zones, 5 zones, 6 zones, however many there are, right? So, what I would describe it is what we used to call it back in the day in the Kenneth Cooper era, when people were, quote, jogging, unquote, end quote. This was when you could do what we call take the talk test. Right. When you were running with a buddy or your significant other, could you have a chat without getting super winded? Could you just have a generic chat with somebody? And that would be zone 2. So, and somebody who's a world-class distance runner, that could be 6.5 minutes a mile. So it could be pretty fast, right? But for most people, it's a moderate jog is what I would describe it as. And we can use your rating of perceived exertion. There's a lot of, you could use heart rate, but heart rate gets in problems because your heart rate changes as you age, changes as you train. And there's a lot of variability, even if not all 30-year-olds have the same maximum heart rate. There's a lot of variability there. It's a comfortable pace that you can sustain without any burning sensation, talking, and so forth, is what I would describe it as. And I was watching the Tour de France this morning when I was working out myself, and today was a long day, mostly flat, and there were no breakaways. And they said that people were riding at about 170 watts per minute. Right now, and for these guys, that's probably at the lower end of zone 2, right? At the very low end of zone 2. And so think about to be fit enough where you can just ride 170 watts for 4 hours without maybe 5 hours, no sweat.
It's absolutely remarkable.
Wild. Yeah, but again, they have these are people that can sustain 300 watts or 400 watts for an hour, maybe even longer.
So it's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, that's one of the, you've seen those things before the big city marathons where they have somebody get on a treadmill and see how long they can go at Kipchoge pace, and you got people falling off after like 10 seconds, right?
But you've got a huge chunk of the population that actually can't run that fast.
Yeah, period. Right, correct. I can't anymore, that's for sure. Yeah. I destroyed my cardiovascular system aside, I destroyed both of my hamstrings in the process.
Yeah, I remember watching the London Marathon when I was still living in the UK and watching Paula Radcliffe.
Oh, yeah.
She was dominating. And she was
great Paula Radcliffe.
Yeah, she had like splits of 4:26 or something for a marathon.
No, it'd be 5:26. But
5:26. It was just, I remember it just being absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, most people can't. I mean, the number of people who can run a mile in less than 6 minutes is incredibly small.
Yeah. So, okay, we've got zone 2, and we've talked about vigorous training. What's the balance of training that we need then in order to get the benefits?
So this is a question I get asked all the time. And so what happened about, 20, 30 years ago, somebody said, you need to write a book about endurance training and running training, right? So I said, I have. It's called the running haiku. Run a lot of miles, some faster than your race pace, rest once in a while. So that's the running haiku, right? And that's 575 for our Japanese friends following at home in terms of the syllables. All right, now where did the running haiku come from? The running haiku came from the 1964 Olympic finals in the 5,000 meters. It was won by a guy on a wet, muddy track. So that's, believe it or not, people used to run on dirt tracks, right? It was run by an American named Bob Schul, who did interval training twice a day. So, every day, and did almost no continuous training, none.
Right.
And Schul would do, you might do something like 40 times 100 meters in the morning, and then do a bunch of 400 meters in the afternoon, right? The second place finisher, who was about this far behind, was called Harold Norpoth. And Norpoth did what we would call zone 2 training today. In those days, it was called long, slow distance. Mm-hmm. And he ran hundreds of kilometers a week, very slow, but about 5% of the time, he did run fast. So he ran a few fast miles, and he raced a lot. Then there was a guy called Bill Dellinger, who was the track coach for many years at Oregon, who just died. And I think he was 90, 91. And Dellinger did modern training, a mix of all of it: hills, speed work, intervals, longer, slower runs. And so, if you look at this, is that there's people who've been successful at the highest level using any combination of the above. Mm-hmm. And if I lived in Manhattan, I'd certainly train differently than if I lived in Boulder, Colorado.
Right.
So I think the most important thing is to do something and to recognize that there are many, many ways to do this. Zone 2 is popular because you typically don't get hurt, you don't get overtrained, and it will make you get a lot better, especially if you go from doing nothing. But you have to do some, zone 3, 4, 5. You got to do some speed workout if you want to get to your genetic potential.
I really appreciate that message, because one of the philosophies that's been popularized is that we just need to, like, hours and hours of zone 2. Yes. And having tried it, there just aren't enough hours in the day for me to be able to do that. The other thing is, we see power and we see anaerobic capacity dropping a lot as people age. But I believe, much like strength, it's because people stop doing it.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. If you, a couple of things. If you look at people who've kept lifting, their muscle fibers atrophy less, especially their fast twitch fibers. But there's not very many of them. People have been lifting hard their whole life. But when you do look at those people, you see that. The other really interesting thing is, if you look at cyclists, people that have been there are some Olympic champion Tour de France type cyclists who kept riding. Now, are they riding 3-4 hours a day? No. Are they riding an hour a day, 2 hours a day? Yes. And one of the things that's interesting about cycling compared to, say, running is that you use higher forces because you do have to go uphill.
Yeah.
And there's always some higher force stuff going on, and unless you're just totally flat, living in the Netherlands or something. And those people, the muscle quality they show in their thighs is quite remarkable. Mm-hmm. Quite remarkable, even into their 70s, and they show that the CT scans of their legs look great. And I think the other thing, again, if you look at the people who continue to train hard when they swim, with swimming and to some extent rowing, because while those have a huge aerobic component, there's also you also are producing higher forces with your muscles. You see people that have obviously maintained their muscle mass. In contrast to people who only run, a lot of times as they get older, they can look a little bit cachectic. Mm-hmm. So I do think that that's the advantage of doing some strength training and cross training as you age, because you will be working and lifting. I mean, I lift 3 days a week. I'm going to do it later today, because you do not as you get older and older. As important as cardiovascular fitness is, loss of strength is frequently what limits people's ability to do their activities of daily living.
Yeah.
Get out of the car. And I think 70%, and this could be an urban legend, Jeremy, but 70% of 70-year-olds can't get off the floor.
We start every conversation with people about what do you want to be doing when you're 90?
Correct.
And we then say, okay, well, can you get off the floor today?
Correct.
right? And we've had 50-year-olds who can't get off the floor. And you say, well,
Correct.
okay, you want to be playing pickleball when you're 90, but you
You
can't
better,
get off
yeah,
the
you better
floor
be able to get
today.
off the
Like,
floor now, right? Well, one of the things too is that I need to start again. I have a jump rope my mother gave me when I was 14, a
yeah,
beautiful boxer's leather jump rope with ball bearings in it. And I don't know what the hockey players you worked with do, but at one point cross training was training like boxers, and
yeah.
boxers were considered in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s considered the fittest all around athletes.
Hmm.
And because they hit the heavy bag, they did all sorts of other things to get strong. They didn't lift much, but they were swinging, chopping wood, doing this, doing that, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, they were enthusiastic rope skippers. And again, I'd be curious to know, was jumping rope a big deal in hockey?
Actually, my time in the NBA, I was with the Nets for 5 years.
Oh, really?
We started every single practice because of
Oh, yeah.
the high forces through the Achilles. Every practice we started with 3 rounds of jump rope, some glute med work, some core
Yeah.
activation, because I just felt that was such an important thing for those
Correct.
athletes because of the vertical loading. Hockey being almost entirely lateral,
Yeah.
we did less jump rope, but we still kept plyometrics in their program.
Yeah. Right.
Because what we found was they were actually getting hurt when they left at the end of the season and went home to train with their home trainers. They'd start plyometrics right away, having not done any. And we had a couple of ruptured Achilles. And I think that it's also an important point for a really important point. If you're going to start something like pickleball or tennis, we've seen a lot of
Yeah. Yeah.
people going out and rupturing Achilles because they haven't been in that elastic environment. So as a training startup, I think it's a really important one.
Well, I think the other thing too, especially for people who've been fit at one point, you see this with athletes. They take a couple of weeks off at Christmas, come jump right back into it, and they get tremendous muscle damage. Even some of the CrossFit enthusiasts sometimes have a rhabdo problem. And I
Hmm.
think what you described there with somebody's an elite, hey, I know how to do plyometrics, and they start with the same dose they were doing preseason versus giving
Yeah,
themselves 2 3 weeks to jump back in and reacclimate. I couldn't agree with you more. Big
right.
challenge. Big challenge. But the other advantage of jump roping for older people, besides the type of loading you're talking about, is to me it's one of the great ways to prevent slips and falls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's for me the importance of strength and power training is exactly that. Mostly people are going to trip versus just sort
Right.
of fall. And so
Right.
can you get your foot out in front of you? And do you have the strength in your lower body to brace and put the brakes on?
Bingo. 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 Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually work specifically on that in multiple directions with all of our clients
Right.
above 60. Have them actually fall forward and bring their foot out and
Well,
start.
and you look at some of the footwork drill that people do, karaoke's and other things too, which would, if people, I mean, I can still do it, skipping, things like that, but not everybody can as they age. But that those are very, very useful. And one of the things that people do not realize, and I had the privilege of watching the Warriors practice, or Golden State Warriors practice, a couple of summers ago, and my wife Terry was an excellent Division I basketball player, and I was pretty good in high school. I certainly played, and what struck me was the extent to which the first 15 minutes of practice looked like a really good old school high school or college practice. The drills were the same. The stuff you're talking about with the jump and rope, the movement and cutting, the ball handling drills were all the same.
Hmm.
And then some of the fast break and weave sort of thing. And what struck me was just watching, people doing it, bigger men doing it faster and more skillfully was really nice. I mean, it'd be like watching Benny Goodman or somebody, a jazz master, warm up on their instrument, doing the exact. Which brings me to a point. If you look at elite musicians, the fingering drills, the scales and arpeggios, they do the same thing.
Hmm.
They do the same thing in track and
Yeah.
field form drills. The
Yeah.
classic form drills of Bud Winter from San Jose State. Everybody's doing them. Everybody's doing them, and
Yeah.
people, the average citizen doesn't understand how committed the elites are to the fundamentals, and the paradox of it.
I can absolutely confirm that. in Toronto, we built a system. We went 3.5 years without having a single non-contact injury.
Yeah, there you go.
And we did that through lifting weights,
Right.
practicing at game speed, having
Yep.
really, really good manual therapists, and feeding the guys well, having them sleep.
Right.
It wasn't that we had some fancy technology. Like, we
Right.
had that, but it was to augment what we were doing down here,
Well, and,
right?
and
The
the very
fundamentals.
best players, your very, very, very best players, the people that are going to get in the Hockey Hall of Fame, make the Olympic team, that sort of thing. My guess is, especially the ones who last a long time, have long careers, are the people that are mature enough to be most into it. Most
Absolutely
into
right.
it. They're
Absolutely
the
right.
ones that are early. They're the ones who are most committed. And frequently, when you look at the highest level people, whether you think about in any sport, you will find the highest level people have a relationship, typically with an assistant coach
Yeah.
who is kind of a guru of X or a guru of Y, a hitting guru in baseball,
Yeah.
a pitching coach in baseball, a position coach in football. I don't know what the equivalent is in hockey. Uh, you know, uh, Somebody who's interested in whatever, but they have a very tight relationship. Talking about the aunt and uncle thing again, with a relative, and a lot of times these coaches are old. I mean, they're like 60, 70
Mhm.
years old, and they've seen it all, done it all, and they develop these really remarkable and tight relationships with the elite player, and you see it with two examples come to mind in the United States. One is Tom Moore, the quarterback coach who was with Peyton Manning for a long time, who described their collaborative process to come up with game plans. And then, we think of Don Zimmer, the Yankee bench coach, as sort of a plump guy chewing tobacco, who was a bit of a caricature. But Zimmer was an excellent player, had been an excellent manager, and he was and a good infielder. He was very, very close to Jeter,
Mhm.
and Jeter relied on him to tell him the truth,
Right.
and point out. But he was also able to go to both these men were able to go to their coach and let their hair down and not feel vulnerable because they could have an honest discussion with these senior individuals. So I think that's
Mhm.
one of the things we've drifted into here, whether it's club rugby in the UK or what we're talking about now, is the need for people to find, for lack of a better word, coaching uncles in their
Yeah.
own world, professional and athletic world as well. And let's not forget the aunts too.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And I think that's what we've tried to do for people in the general population now, is bring some of that stuff that's kept behind closed doors in pro sport,
Right.
and really try and open the doors for people a little bit. So as we look at people with busy lives, right? We talked about, okay, we might not have this much time
Yeah.
to do zone two. How much is enough? Like, what do I have to do
Yeah.
today?
Right.
I'm a founder of a company, right? I've got a crazy schedule. What's enough for me to be doing in order
Right.
to move the needle on my health?
I want to leave you with three. I want to start with three quotes. One of them is mine, but two of them come from the great basketball coach John Wooden. One is, "Don't permit what you cannot do to interfere with what you can do."
Hmm.
Two is from Wooden, "Don't mistake activity for achievement." Right, which is another good one that goes back to the metric thing. And the third one is mine. If to be a maximalist, you got to be a minimalist first. So what are you going to stop doing? So if you look at hyper successful people, a lot of times they have super creative lives in one swim lane. And the rest of their life is very stereotyped. They park in the same place, they eat the same thing for breakfast, they eat the same thing for lunch. They really have a big routine, except in that one area where they're really going for it, right?
Hmm.
So, and if what we know about physical activity is that as soon as people go from nothing to something, as little as 10 or 15 minutes a day of just moderate physical activity, you start to reduce the risk. And once you get to 30 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity, at least from an epidemiological perspective, you probably get 70, 80% of the benefits of exercise. So, and we also know that people who do a little bit during the week, but more during the weekend warrior thing, that those people also help themselves. So I think a couple of things. One is I typically go first thing in the morning because the day catches up with you.
Hmm.
All right. So find a time. that is protected where you can work out. The hockey at lunch is a good one too because everybody was doing it, right?
Yeah.
But find that time. And you see it on at big university campuses, many of the faculty exercising at lunch, that sort of thing. And like what we discussed about the noon ball. But so find a time. And then I think the other thing you've got to have is a minimal workout, which of calisthenics and things like that you can do in about 20 minutes and you can do anywhere. There's this terrific program developed by the Canadian government, the Royal Canadian Air Force, called the 5BX program for basic exercise. And it was developed for use in Arctic air bases, when they were worried about the Russians flying over, the Soviets flying over the Arctic and bombing us, right? And they had a bunch of NATO bases up there. And it was a calisthenic program that took 12 minutes a day. Marty Gabala up in Canada put some people, because he's interested in high intensity training, put some untrained people through it and got great results.
Mm-hmm.
Great results. And so again, I mentioned the Cooper test, but look up 5BX on Wikipedia and you can get some interesting stuff. And you can go download a PDF of the program. And they've got these beautiful 1950s drawings in it, and so it's great. But so what can you do? And if you can't do anything, can you walk a little bit more? Can you take the stairs? Where you park in your car? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's incredibly helpful. So really going up to that 30 minutes a day. Would you say, are we looking at a mix of lifting and cardiovascular training?
Anything.
Just moving the body?
Anything. Could be anything. Pick one. And I think the other thing, too, is I try never to take a third day in a row off with nothing. And then I think the other thing to think about is if you do have, some time off, it's easy to get in kind of I should have done this, I should have done that. I'm a bad person because I was lazy at the beach or whatever. Had too much to drink last night, whatever it is. And I think you can't, it's the old thing, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. That's over.
Yeah.
All you can do is what's going to happen next. So just get something done today.
Yeah, that's certainly, how Michelle and I approach our training is that we'll do about 20 minutes of lifting in a circuit style format.
Yeah, circuits are great.
We get the cardiovascular benefit. We get a lot of strength out of it. Twice a week, we'll do dedicated cardio sessions.
Yep.
We'll take walks after dinner every night. We got the dog. And so we really have gone from, I think early in my career, it got more and more complicated, and it's become less and less complicated again.
Right. There's a lot of, I think, again, three quotes. One is from Johan Cruyff, the great, soccer/football player and coach from the Netherlands, who said something about playing simple football is difficult. There's a little bit better quote there, but if you're really skilled, you can play a simple game. The great jazz pianist Thelonious Monk said, "Simple ain't easy."
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Anton de Saint-Exupéry, the guy who wrote the short story "The Little Prince." Most people don't realize he was also a superb or well-known aircraft engineer and made fundamental improvements in planes in the 20s and 30s. And he said you've achieved perfection in design not when you have nothing left to add, but when you have nothing left to take away. Yeah, I think what Cruyff said is football is a simple game, but playing simple football is difficult.
I read an article on the wellness boom and how it has not improved the health metrics of the general population.
Right.
And I think that it's because of this. We have a venture capital backed wellness industry now, which means profitable, which means what can I sell you to stick in your body that isn't really going to do anything to you?
There's also a lot of barriers, Jeremy. I agree with you. But remember, only 20% of people just at baseline see a big connection between their current behavior and a future outcome. Yeah. So the other people are, people don't adhere to their medicines. They don't take their statins, even if they've had a heart attack, all kinds of things like that. But I agree with you. But I interrupted you about the venture capitalist needing something to sell.
Yeah, and it's just our program is very simple. The message is simple. What we did at the Maple Leafs was simple with regards to we didn't innovate away from the fundamentals.
Yeah.
It's a complex environment and a complex implementation. But when you walked in, and we had this conversation with the head strength coach with Kansas basketball last week on the podcast, he had someone drive 9 hours to watch his workout with the team. And he's like, man, I felt bad. We were just doing some very basic goblet squats.
Yeah, right.
It's like, that's what people need to see, is
Right.
that these are the important things that will actually move the needle. Just move your
Right.
body, right? And you will
I
get the
couldn't agree with
benefit.
you more. I could not agree with you more. And I think that what is it, complexify, which I don't even know if that's a word, but it should be. If it isn't, it should be, right? Complexification. Yeah, right. And so I think you really want to avoid that. And again, simple programs that are easy to communicate. And I again, thinking about John Wooden, the great basketball coach who won 11 national titles at UCLA, Vince Lombardi, the iconic football coach, they had very thin playbooks.
Mm-hmm.
And they made them thinner as they got older, and they began to believe that they executed correctly the very basic game plan that they couldn't be stopped.
Right.
And that sends also a message to the people under your supervision of great confidence. If we do our job and focus again on what we now call process-based thinking, which has been, again, in the coaching world, a lot of people use it, and a lot of people have used it forever. But it's certainly become identified with Nick Saban and to some extent Bill Belichick. Do your job.
Mm-hmm.
Let's worry about the next play. And let's practice. That sort of thing. So yeah, I think you're correct. Yeah, you don't have to convince me. Let's put it that way.
Right. And so, Mike, as we come to a close here, we like to give people 3 takeaways that they can take away after the episode and implement right away. What would be your 3 points that people can take away?
I would go back to my 3 quotes is don't permit what you cannot do to interfere with what you can do. So find something you can do and that you can be consistent with and that you like doing, and it's built into your day. The next thing is don't mistake activity for achievement. We can, which is, again, let's not get too obsessed with the metrics. Let's worry about what we're achieving. Mm-hmm. How much work we're doing? Are we doing our workouts? Are we engaging in physical activity? Do we have a strong community? Do we have a social network? And then the third one is don't, to be a maximalist, you must first be a minimalist. And I'm as bad as anybody. These things are terribly distracting. They're a lot of fun, but they're terribly distracting. And we live in a really distractible world. And so what can you stop doing? How can you eliminate distractions, whether it's in your personal life, in your whatever you're doing recreationally, and or your work life? What can you stop doing? And I might,
yeah.
And I think if you do those, it's a 3-legged stool there. If you do all 3 of those things, you get a positive feedback loop between them. You're less distracted, so you have more time for achievement and versus just idle activity or things that look good but really aren't doing much for you. And then you're able to focus on what you can do.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that now, just looking at my schedule.
Yeah, right.
Am I busy or am I achieving?
Yeah, right. Right, exactly. Perfect.
I'm going to go back and review it.
How many meetings can we cancel?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Or how many can be 15 minutes long instead of, whatever.
Yeah. And where can people find you to learn more about you?
I used to have a blog, and I haven't done that for a while, but there's some interesting things on YouTube of lectures I've given. And, and I'll send you a couple of reprints that we'll talk about some of these ideas that have been published recently. Jeremy, and you can post them or do whatever you want to with them.
Yeah, we'll include all this in the show notes for sure. That'd be great. Wonderful. Yeah. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time.
No, I really enjoyed visiting with you, and it's always interesting when people have, kind of a convergent mentality and without really rehearsing anything can just sort of play off each other. So it's been great.
What an impactful conversation with Dr. Mike Joyner on cardiovascular fitness and longevity. Here are today's key takeaways from Dr. Joyner. Number 1, Focus on what you can do. Don't let what you can't do stop you from doing what you can do. Find a manageable activity that you enjoy and consistently build it into your daily routine. Number 2, prioritize achievement over activity. Don't confuse being busy with making real progress. Avoid obsessing over metrics and instead aim for meaningful outcomes from your physical activities. Number 3, embrace minimalism first. Before trying to do more, eliminate unnecessary distractions and commitments. Streamline your schedule to prioritize what genuinely enhances your health and vitality. If today's conversation resonated with you, at Vitality Collective, we're here to help you implement these principles through personalized health and performance strategies designed to optimize your vitality at any stage of life. Ready to take the next step towards building lasting health and vitality? Visit www.vitality-collective.com to get started. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.